Good afternoon, folks. Let's talk about Chapter 5, X-ray production. This particular section of our limited operator is going to cover the production of video or radiographic images and how we go about doing it. So put your seatbelts on, let's move forward, and let's talk about X-ray production. All right, our learning objectives. We're going to talk about X-ray tube, and we're going to talk about labeling its parts. This is in your book. We're also going to have it on a slide. Also, we're going to be able to describe the composition and the functions of the basic parts of the X-ray tube. And also, we need to associate the terms of anode and cathode. If you remember from our last chapter, we started talking about that in Chapter 4 with the appropriate parts of the X-ray tube. Also describe the production of the bremsstrahlung and the characteristic radiation and explain what determines the wavelength of each. We're also going to explain what is meant by dual focus tubes and also describe its advantages and disadvantages. We'll also talk about the significance of the target angle when you're doing X-ray imaging with respect to the line of focus principle and also the maximum field size. We'll also define effective focal spot and state its significance with respect to the radiographic image. Also, we need to learn about the function of rotating anode and state its purpose, why it does rotate, and state the effective changes in milliamperage MA and kilovolt kVps levels on the resulting X-ray beam. All right, folks, here is the X-ray tube. Okay, go to X-ray tube. X-ray tube is a vacuum Pyrex envelope which houses the anode and the cathode. The anode, positive, cathode, negative. Anode is the positive end of the X-ray tube and contains the tungsten target. The tungsten target. Okay, here we go, folks. Here is your anode right here. Okay, this is the anode side. And it contains the tungsten target. This is the guy here, all right? The cathode is the negative end of the X-ray tube and contains the tungsten filament. That's this dude right here. There's your filament, okay? So your cathodes. Let's go back and let's make sure that we understand. Anode, okay? The anode is positive. The cathode is negative, okay? And it's in a Pyrex envelope. It's in this tube, okay? It's in this tube. Let's make sure that we understand that and how to draw that. You will see this on the test. I am positive. You need to be able to at least recognize that the anode is positive and the cathode is negative. Cathode contains the filament and the anode contains the tungsten target. X-ray production. The tungsten filament is heated. It produces a thermonic emission, or specifically the release of negatively charged electrons. Okay, let's go back through that. It creates a lot of heat, and it does an emission, thermonic emission through heat, and through heat production, it releases negatively charged electrons. Okay, then the step-up transformer provides a high voltage source to the current that goes through the tube. Upon striking the target, the kinetic energy or movement of the electrons is converted to X-rays. Okay, X-rays, which is relatively about less than 1% of the overall process. Now, the heat process is greater than 99%. So, again, let's go back to this is low radiation type of devices, of imaging, okay? It's not like you're working in a nuclear power plant or a nuclear submarine or working in a lab that has CT scans, that kind of stuff. No, it's not. You're using low radiation sources. So it's less than 1%, okay? Converted into X-rays, but there's a lot of heat that's generated. All right, so bremsstrahlung radiation. It occurs when an electron passes close to the nucleus of a target atom. Let's go this again. The radiation, bremsstrahlung radiation, okay, occurs when an electron that you have shot through that tube passes close to the nucleus of a target atom. The target atom is our tissue. It is the K-shell of the tissue. A positive charged nucleus then attracts a negative electron, causing it to slow and lose energy. Then the lost electronic kinetic energy is converted into an X-ray photon. Bingo. Simple process. Woo, right? Some physics. But if you just remember, radiation is produced by electrons. We have to pass it through a nucleus to the target atom of the tissue, and then ionization occurs. All right, so characteristics. Specific characteristics of radiation are quite definitive. They occur when an electron collides with a K-shell electron of a target atom tissue, okay? Then the K-shell electron is knocked out, creating a vacancy. Thus, energy in the form of X-ray photon is released. And it bounces up to the image receptor, and guess what? Woohoo! We have a picture. Yay! Okay. All right, so radiation wavelength. With regards to radiation wavelengths, Brimslong's radiation wavelength and energy vary depending on the speed of the electrons, and also it makes up the majority of the X-ray beam. Their true characteristics are that the wavelengths and the energy do not vary. Minimum of 70 kVp is needed for characteristic X-rays to be produced. So we're only dealing with a minimum of 70 kVps in order to produce a true X-ray image. That's a test question, by the way. All right, this is another test question. Heterogenesis. All right, it is the term used to describe the wavelength of the X-ray beam. To describe the wavelength of the X-ray beam, it simply means the beam is made up of different wavelengths and energies. It can vary based on the need, based on the depth of the tissue, based on whatever anatomical region you're doing an X-ray of. Heterogenesis. Put that one in mind. You'll see that on a test. All right, cathode. Here we go again. Anode. Cathode frequently contains a large and small filament. Okay, this is the dude. All right, this is the cathode. It is the dude, and then if it's dual focus with a focusing cup. Now, the focusing cup propels the electrons towards a specific area of the anode target. The anode, okay, is the focal spot, is the area of target, where the electrons are going to interact with the tissue. The focal spot. It rotates during exposure to distribute and dissipate the heat from the electron integration or the electron creation, and attenuation. So anyhow, it has to rotate to keep itself cool. If it does not rotate to keep itself cool, that interaction between electrons would get so hot it would actually burn up. Okay, so anode rotation. The anode rotation is for the standard speed is usually around 3,600 RPM. Definitely need to remember that. That'd be a question, on your test. That is the standard speed. Okay, so is the norm. In high speeds of 10,000 RPM or more, it kicks in when the exposure techniques reach the higher levels of KVP and MAS, and they help to dissipate the heat. You will hear this spin up when you first turn on your radiographic device, your imaging machine in the morning. You're going to hear it spin up because it's beginning to warm up. This also allows for the higher exposure techniques to be applied to the tube. Dual focus X-ray tubes, you have a small filament and a large filament. The smaller stream in the small filament of electrons result in fewer X-rays, production, and also less heating of the anode, and the greater the image resolution. This is used for medium and small size patients. You get into the larger filament, when you have a larger stream of electrons, it results in more X-rays, greater anode heating, and also less image detailed, but it penetrates much deeper. It's used for large patients, and you have less image resolution. Line focus principle, it's the relationship, plain and simple, between the actual and effective focal spots. Okay, so here's the tungsten focal area here in this area. This is the electron stream size, and this is the actual focal spot side, and this is the effective focal spot side. and here is your image receptor. We'll talk about it a little bit later because everything's bounced off of filters and mirrors in most of your X-ray machines in order to truly get a good focus and reduce the amount of radiation applied to the patient. So the effective focal spot here, is very effectively the target area from which the X-rays are projected towards the image receptor. All right, so line focus principle as we continue, because of the anode angle, the angle of the anode, the effective focal spot is always smaller than the actual focal spot. Most common effective focal spots in small focus, that's the smallest area, is 0.6 millimeters, and the largest focus is about 1.2 millimeters. All right, so anode heel effect. This actually refers to the absorption of X-rays by the anode's target heel. Okay, the anode's target heel. The target heel is this particular constructive device here within the collimator itself. The X-ray intensity is so much greater at the cathode and less at the anode, and the anode ends at the X-ray beam. This is your essential X-ray here. You can see that it is spread out as a diagram to show you the wavelengths that are being caused, by the X-rays here. So the further we move up onto the actual heel of the anode itself, the more significant the actual radiation production or radiation beam is. So this cannot be changed, so it's used to help produce uniform radiographic density of certain body parts, especially the thoracic spine, by placing the thicker portion under the cathode end of the beam and the thinner portion under the anode portion. So this is an adjustment that creates within itself that's called the heel effect, okay, of the anode target. Kilovoltage and X-ray productions, as we discussed in Chapter 3, the higher kVp increases electron speed during X-ray production, resulting in X-rays with shorter wavelengths, more energy, and greater penetrating ability. We use higher kVp for larger and/or denser body parts, and that kVp controls the penetration and the contrast of the image. Right, so milliamperage time in X-ray production. We need to be mindful of milliamps time in X-ray production, remembering that with milliamperage, the higher milliamperage results in more X-rays produced per seconds of exposure. We use higher MAs for larger body parts. Okay, higher MAs for larger body parts because we're having more time of exposure through MAS. All right, so filtration removes low energy, long wavelength X-rays, photons that cause unnecessary patient exposure. They all have them, as you can see here. And this is your X-ray tube. Remember, this is the heel of the anode that we were talking about earlier. Just as a reminder, it gives you a relatively, where it's at and where it's located within the tube itself. Inherently, it's 0.5 millimeters aluminum equivalent plus glass and oil. Okay, this area right here is a filter that is naturally in within the tube. It's got, the glass in itself, so it reduces about 0.5 millimeters AL equivalent. Added to that is another filter, okay, aluminum filter, that is added. It gives an additional 1.0 AL equivalent. And then you have a mirror, because like I said, you bounce off the actual focal image. The mirror adds another 1.0 millimeters AL equivalent, which gives you a total of 2.5 millimeters AL equivalent on most filtration systems. All right, so regulation. X-ray equipment are capable of operating anything over 70 kVp must have that 2.5 millimeters of AL equivalent. This includes the filtration effect of the glass, oil, aluminum, and also the mirror. Primary purpose of the filtration is to reduce the amount of the dose to the patient. Please remember that. That is definitely a test question. 70 kVp units need to have a minimum of 2.5 AL, period. All right, so total filtration. This area right here, here's an aluminum filter right here. This is what we were talking about right below the word Eureka. It is mounted into the system. In summary, the X-ray tube has a positive anode, which is the target, and a negative cathode, which is the filament. When the high-speed electrons from the filament interact with the target, Bremsstrahlung characteristic X-rays are produced. Dual focus X-ray tubes have a large and small filament. Also, small filaments result in smaller focal spots with better image detail but less heat loading capacity on the tube itself. Because of the anode angle, the effective focal spot is always smaller than the actual focal spot. And we talked about the anode heel effect. I even showed you what it looked like on the expanded version of the tube. It refers to a variation in radiation intensity between the anode and the cathode ends of the X-ray beam. KVP affects the penetrating ability. KVP means penetration ability of the X-ray themselves, and MA affects the number of X-rays produced per second. Time is how long the X-rays are produced, and MAs is the product of time and indicates the total exposure to the patient. Filtration removes long wavelength and energy rays that would be absorbed by the patient. So we need to have that filtration put in place. All right, folks. If there's any questions, once again, here's the old dude that got his hand smashed by the pump. Any questions, please feel free to send them to me, student@emets.net if you're taking an EMETS program, or student@metsciinstitute.com if you're taking a METSCI program. All right, folks, have a great evening. We'll see you next time.